I did not study her in college. We got Garcia Lorca, lots of Garcia Lorca, who I like very much. Uh, Pedro Salinas, Alberti, Neruda, Storni, nothing of Mistral. I was in the library and I picked up a book because it had a really weird title, Lecturas para Mujeres, pues, tan solo para mujeres. And I began reading it. I knew she won the Nobel Prize, but I was fascinated by what it said about post-revolutionary Mexico, and also this weird combination of conservatism and and radicalism and originality all combined in one. Um, I then started reading from Lagarde, the series Locas Mujeres, which has since become, back when I was reading it, people were saying, oh, this is very hermetic. Lagarde is obscure, and but I just thought it was extraordinary. Uh, I couldn't believe that I had never heard of her and that this poetry was original, weird, good. Um, I went to Barnard College, which is where Doris Dana and Gabriela Mistral met. So I wrote a letter to Doris Dana and I said, I'd like to translate her because I was doing translation at the time. I'd like to translate her. Could I have your permission? And I mentioned Barnard College at least once. And she said, see me the next time you come through New York. And I met her then. And I thought I was going to be very clever and sort of say, well, what should I do if North Americans ask me if she's a lesbian? Because I thought, this would be my way to do it. And she skirted around it. She said, ¿Por qué ponerla en una caja tan pequeña? But I met Doris Dana's pareja. I mean, she was clearly gay. She was clearly a lesbian, but she didn't want to be out, or she's from a generation when one didn't do that. And I just thought, I just kept on reading. I applied for a Fulbright in Chile, and I went and I lived there for a year under the Pinochet dictatorship, and it changed a certain direction of my life. I knew when I was doing my doctorate that I was going to do it in comparative literature. No one was going to give me a job teaching Spanish. There's plenty of people more qualified than me to do that. But so I wrote about people in U.S. literature and other writers. I started getting that idea, and I knew that it was going to be a lot of work. So I didn't. What I did was that I did an edition of letters. There was a Victoria Ocampo scholar who approached me. She had written a biography of Ocampo with Ocampo's permission and cooperation. And Ocampo was very careful with retaining her letters. And when she had more and more problems with the Peruvian government, she decided she was going to sell them. And she sold them because a collection of letters that's a mess is not worth as much as a collection that's in good. It's all already organized. She sold them to Harvard, and the person who I collaborated with was part of that sort of arrangement. So I always was interested in letters. So when she asked me, she said, would you help me edit the letters of Mistral and Ocampo? Because she needed someone who would be able to deal with the fact that so many of them were not dated. She didn't write dates on a lot of them. And I think that she knew by that point, we knew each other, started to know each other pretty well. She knew that I had certain qualities that you need to have. I'm very persistent. And so I did that. And I like letters a lot. They've always fascinated me. I like reading particularly dead people's mail. Living people, not so much, but dead people's mail. In Spain, and in Spanish in general, there's not much of a biographical tradition the way there is in English. So in England, particularly, there's this tradition of writing first-rate biographies of fifth-rate writers. You know, there's a lot of great biographies of Shakespeare, and then there's millions of biographies of these writers you never heard of. And I thought, why not take my obsession, my love of letters, my interest in poetry. I've never really liked write. I mean, I know how to write criticism of poetry and it's useful to some extent, but the best thing to do for poetry is you write a poem, right? That's what you do. Or you read, you declaim a poem, but those are the responses to poetry. But a response, because what's interesting to me about Mistral is that she, among other things, is that she was a witness, direct witness to major events in history, major historical events throughout her life, from fairly early, witnessing labor unrest in Chile, to the to working in post-revolutionary to Mexico, living in Paris, and participating in the League of Nations, to being in Spain right before the Civil War, being in Portugal during the Civil War. I mean, over and over, being the places that she was in and the people she knew. It just seemed, and she's also writes extraordinary prose. So why not do it? Why not? Why not? I didn't expect it to take me this long. It's not so much that it took me by surprise, but that it helped put a lot of pieces together when I began seeing this. It took me by surprise in the sense that it's not something that one realizes from reading one set of letters, one correspondence. So if I read just the correspondence between Mistral and Ocampo, no, she's just this person who's got a lot in common with Ocampo, even though they have nothing in common. Right? Ocampo is fabulously wealthy from the Argentine oligarchy, but they have the same birthday. so, uh, so it's not something that I expected to find. But when you see anyone's letters in aggregate, like if someone looked at the entire contents of your sent email, your emails, then they would see something that they wouldn't see from seeing just a single relationship. So it surprised me, but by that point, I had seen enough letters that nothing was surprising me anymore. So I don't know, it's interesting to think about what is most surprising. I guess it's surprising in the sense of it is, as you say, very different than this picture that we have of someone who was a great poet, perhaps by accident, or the idea that she was a diplomat by accident. I mean, how does a woman born in 1889 get to be accidentally anything? Right? The accident is that all the things she didn't become. She did not become a mother. She did not become a housewife. She did not be, she, no one would have predicted any of those things for her. She needed, she also, she shifted as much of her work as she could to other people in order to have time to write something that I think any one of us who writes kind of likes that idea. I mean, how do you get the time to write? But I don't think that, I think that they to some extent, they acted as her PR people, much more Palma Guillén than Laura Rodig. Because Laura was the first and there was no model for her to follow. It was sort of so much of it by chance. I think, though, that each secretariat more than the next, or say, how do you put it? there began to develop a pattern that we see with Palma Guillen and then Connie Saleva, in the most of all with Doris Dana, of being fascinated by una estrella and all of the advantages that come with that. And that's clearly what was something. Why was Palma again doing the stuff that she was doing? Because it enabled her to, for example, become a diplomat at the level of an ambassador when Gabriela Mistral was just an honorary consul. So it was very, very useful to the government of Mexico to have Gabriela Mistral around. And Palma Guillen knew that. I don't think that I think that it would be impossible for one or two or three people to be responsible for the gigantic myth of Gabriela Mistral. It's a cultural negotiation, no? Less prominent here in Spain, no? I mean, people say they've heard of her perhaps. But if you read any blogs in Chile or anything like that, as soon as someone mentions Gabriela Mistral, there'll be like 50 people who respond, "Grande Gabriela, nuestra Gabriela." And have they read her? I don't know. Pero es grande. If they want to start with Gabriela Mistral, one way to do it is to start with a smaller selection as opposed to a whole poemario. So there's a selection called Locas Mujeres. They're written in first person, and she assumes the persona of a different range of women in a whole different possible set of possible attitudes. But they are they date primarily from about half of them date directly from World War II when she was living in Brazil, and they are a form of witness to the craziness of the world at that time. But it's still the world that we live in. It's quite recognizable, the world we live in. That would be one way to start. And the other way would be to just start reading her prose, because not everyone reads poetry and says, terrific, but her prose is extremely accessible, sometimes very fun, and always interesting. And again, she was witness to all kinds of things. So you could have her read, but you could read her prose from any. There's a number of collections, so the prose is good. There's lots of possible ways in. The poets from Spain, Carmen Conde, who was a friend of hers, and her Nanas de Despedlo is an interesting take on the Canción de Cuna. And the Canción de Cuna is a form that Mistral excelled in. They verge on being maldiciones sometimes, which many canciones de cuna are like that. Like, go to sleep, you jerk, I threaten you if you don't. So, or more conventional would be Juana de Ibarroru from Uruguay, also cool. Alfonsina Storni is remarkably actual, no? Everything that she writes, I read it and it feels like it was just written yesterday. They could also read other biographies. And there are, even though the biographical tradition in Spain and Spanish is not what it was, there's a couple. So I would say, I really like Fernando Vallejo, El Mensajero, because it breaks all the rules, every single one. It's a long, so biography is supposed to be in chapters. It's a long rant. And he curses all the people who stood in his way, who kept him from accumulating material about Porfirio Barba Jacob, who is the Colombian Mexican poet that he's writing about. So that would be another possibility.